Congressman Tom Cole, a member of the House Appropriations Committee. Good afternoon to you.
Hey, good to see you.
We could talk all day long. I want to get your thoughts on some of these town hall meetings taking place in New York and South Carolina and Russia. But first, can you give us your reaction to President Trump's news conference? And what were people saying afterwards, particularly your fellow Republicans?
Well, I think most of them were saying it was vintage Trump. I mean, look, he is such a different kind of political figure. It was, wide open, freewheeling, combative. That's pretty typical of his style. I think he actually came out, and certainly in terms of his supporters, that's sort of how they want to see things. They want to see a really vigorous give and take and push back on the Washington media. Frankly, I think the press probably got a little bit distracted getting involved in verbal combat, missed some opportunities, in my view, to ask him some tough questions that legitimately ought to be asked and answered. Well, I think you ought to be asking, exactly what was the nature of the conversation that General Flynn had with the Russian ambassador. They sort of missed that somehow, although that's clearly a big event of the week. I'm not particularly, by the way, concerned about that, but again, I just think they tended to get distracted, and he was, at the end of the day, I mean, each side scored some points, but anytime the media becomes the issue, that's not a bad thing for Donald Trump, and I think he made them the issue. I
was just about to say, don't you think that's, do you think that's strategy on his part? I mean, I have to tell you, I was on the Today Show that day and the day before and the day before, and it felt like we talked about Flynn, for a very long time. I mean, it's not like we certainly didn't talk about it. That is for sure.
Well, I think that's true before, but I think in the conference, the press conference, I don't think it was a central subject, and I think he dominated the stage. And again, when he's in combat with the Washington media, that doesn't hurt him at all with most of his voters. And there's been plenty of polling afterwards. He's actually considered more credible than the media. It's not by a lot, sort of margin of error, but the reality is when he's in a break-even situation after a tough week, and I think he had a tough week, I would say that's pretty good performance for him.
Get your take on an article. It was in the New York Times. It was described advisors' attempts to talk President Trump out of the press conference, saying, quote, over the objections of some top advisors who wanted to steer him away from confrontation, Mr. Trump demanded to face the media, determined to reject the narrative that his administration is sinking into chaos, scandal, and incompetence. Congressman, should we be concerned when we hear reports like this, saying the president isn't taking the advice of some of his top aides?
If I were in the media and was insisting that I talk to the media, I would actually be pretty pleased. He's not trying to avoid, he's trying to actually go head into it. Now, if you're his advisor, it's sort of like watching your kid on a football field. You never like to see him get hit. You don't want him to get out there sometimes. But the reality is, look, this is his style. This is who he is. He is very different than a conventional politician. And I think people have spent, 18 months thinking he would morph into something else. If we don't know by now that he's not going to do that, we're not paying attention. And this is going to be a different presidency. And look, I don't think he had a bad day at all in the press conference for what he wanted to achieve. And again, we're all talking about him right now, and we're not talking about maybe some of the issues that would be less comfortable for him for us to be discussing.
On that note, let me play a clip from the press conference and get your take. Take a listen.
I turn on the TV, open the newspapers, and I see stories of chaos. Chaos. Yet it is the exact opposite. This administration is running like a fine-tuned machine, despite the fact that I can't get my cabinet approved.
You've been serving in Congress since 2003. There are a lot of people watching who respect your opinion. How would you assess the way the White House has been running? You seem very calm. So do you think this is maybe not necessarily business as usual, in comparison to what we're used to, but do you think it's okay at this point?
Well, I would probably borrow a line from Charles Dickens and call it the best of times, the worst of times. Look, he's had a really good 4 weeks in terms of deregulation, both through Congress and what he's doing. He's gotten most of his cabinet, although certainly not all of it, through over contentious Democratic opposition. The Supreme Court nomination is a big win. Getting Keystone, which President Obama vetoed, is a big win. The legislature's starting to move, so all that's good. Now, in terms of its I would actually look at the White House and say, look, there's competing centers of influence here. This is not a situation where you have a Jim Baker, type chief of staff, or a Leon Panetta type chief of staff, who I think really ran the trains on time. And that appears to be, what Mr. Trump wants. I'm not being critical of anybody there, but it does create, sort of the sense that there's a three-wing circus sometimes at the end of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. But if you look in terms of policy, in terms of wins, he's won a lot more than he's lost. He's getting the policy that he wants through. And again, I think he's dominating the stage. And so that's what he wants to do.
Speaking of policy, another big story this week, the Obamacare replacement plan from the White House. President Trump now says it will be shared next month. What do you know about the bill? Are there questions you need answered before you decide whether to support it?
Well, look, I would certainly always support the repeal of Obamacare. In my state, we're down to a single provider. The rates are going up by 69%. We really don't have any choice. I mean, in Oklahoma, at least, it's a very failed system. So I'm anxious to do something better that will give my constituents more health care security. Most of what I heard, we had a conference on this Friday. I liked the different sorts of policies, creating situations where individuals have a lot more choice, where you can bring down your costs because of that. Those things are all good. Things like associated health care plans, being able to buy insurance across state borders. I like that. I have some concern about the proposed methods of financing. None of that's been finally decided. Look, we have Obamacare taxes. I didn't vote for any of them, but you're going to have some revenue, particularly to protect people with pre-existing conditions. I
was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, look, that's absolutely critical.
And what about a lapse? Are you holding on to the fact that we shouldn't have a lapse? You've heard these rowdy town halls who are so concerned.
No, we shouldn't have a lapse. We won't this year. I mean, the plans are already in place for this year. And frankly, most of the insurance companies are writing plans for next year, and they're due by April, and we probably won't have the legislation by then. So I think you probably got security over the next couple of years. But, again, it's a failing system. It can't go on the way it is. So you do have to make changes. I like what I heard on the financing end. There was some discussion about taxing upper-end health care plans, sort of Cadillac health care. I'm not persuaded that's a good idea. I'd rather leave some of the taxes that are in place now, lower them where we can, but I'm not for imposing a new health care tax, or at least I'm very skeptical about doing that. I think it could lead you down a road that politically would put you on an unsustainable position.
Well, Congressman, not to give you an impossible job, but if I were to give you 15 seconds in behalf of Republicans to talk to our viewers about your take on Trump's presidency so far and how you're feeling, how Republicans are feeling, what would you say?
I think they feel pretty good. I think they see a president taking on the Washington establishment, shaking it up. They see a president that's demanding that jobs come home and be created here in the United States. They see a great Supreme Court nominee, and then, frankly, they see somebody that's willing to go out and lead and take the controversy that goes with that. So from a Republican standpoint, again, I think he's had a good opening 4 weeks.
And no need to connect to, I was saying last Saturday, it seems like the last, 3 or 4 Saturdays there have been protests all around the country, around the world, frankly. No need, in your opinion, for him to try to connect with the other half of the country, so to speak?
I think you should always try and connect, but I think it's worth noting we had 2 presidents before Donald Trump that tried to unite the country, and both sincerely, and they both failed, quite frankly, and left the country more divided. I think Trump's decided his goal is going to be to get things done and then hope people, after he gets them done, agree with him and support him. I actually think that's probably smarter. We live in a very polarized. Donald Trump didn't create it. It's here. But I think he's operating in it as best he can. And if he produces results, he's going to do very well. Frankly, if he doesn't, both he and the Republican Party will pay a terrific price.
He didn't create it, but would you say that he's stirring the pot a little bit, Congressman?
Well, I think he's trying not to solve a problem that's probably insolvable. It really is right now. We are divided. I hate to say that. I wish we weren't. The reactions that I see from people toward Trump, I saw Republicans having the same reaction toward President Obama. So look, and I'm not arguing that either one of them created it. It's just the way things are. But focusing on doing things that make a material difference in the lives of the American people, jobs, health care, taxes, if you can succeed in those things, I think you'll get reelected. If you can't, again, you'll pay a price. Your party will pay a price. Congressman Tom Cole, thank you for your time. I said 15 seconds, but then I asked you a question, so I gave you another 15. Thank you for your time.